In the 1990s, a popular book series began. It all started in 1990 when people were intimidated by computer software and using these new programs, we called them. And the first book in the series was DOS for Dummies, 1990. The For Dummies book series began. The best-selling title in the series was Windows for Dummies, and then it went on from there. And now today, that book title series, the For Dummies books, has logged 2,500 different titles. They are designed to be a how-to manual. They are designed to help with simple instructions, basic instructions for a beginner in some category of life that is intimidated by the subject, okay? So, calculus for dummies, sailing for dummies, weight loss for dummies. And this morning, we're going to Habakkuk, which you could rename, if you'd like to, Questioning God for Dummies. If you want to learn how to question God, Habakkuk is the place to learn. And what's so cool about Habakkuk is that we learned last week, God doesn't prohibit questions. He actually invites questions. So we're living in a world where we're struggling with questions that Habakkuk was also struggling with. Questions about economic breakdown, questions about political mayhem, questions about dangers and threats to the world as they knew it. And we go to Habakkuk and we learn that there is a faithful servant who, as he is tempted to become desperate and frustrated, he comes to God with his desperation and frustration. Questions that you have and frustrations that you have, they can either push you away from God or they can cause you to run to God. And Habakkuk came to God with his questions. And the little book of Habakkuk, it occupies just less than 2 pages in my Bible, depending on the print size in your Bible. It's a small book. And it is the record of this exchange, questions and answers, between this sincere man of faith and a God who is willing to receive those questions and respond. Last week we covered the first 11 verses in which we found Habakkuk's question, "Why won't you answer my prayer, Lord? And why are you waiting so long and not intervening in this chaos and evil around me?" And God's answer to the question, God's answer was that I am working, you just don't see it yet. I have a plan, and my plan to deal with the evil in Judah, my people's land, is to bring in another people outside, the Babylonians, the Chaldeans. And they're going to come with their army, and they will be my tool of judgment and chastisement on Judah. I have a plan, you just don't see it. This is going to involve suffering, but I will use it for good as I bring Judah back to myself. And it's all under my control. Habakkuk is not a fan of God's answer, because the idea of the Babylonian army, a brutal, ruthless, pagan people, destroying everything in their path, coming against God's prized, cherished nation Israel, was not something that Habakkuk expected to hear or welcomed. And so today, we see his response back to God. His response is longer, so we're not going to hear God's answer yet. You have to come back next week to hear God's answer. Let's begin in verse number 12. We're going to study all the way down to the end of the chapter and into the first verse of chapter 2. But we'll just start with verses 12 and 13, and I want you to see with me 3 things to keep in mind when you question God. Verse 12. Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, thou hast ordained them for judgment, and Almighty God, thou hast established them for correction. Thou art purer eyes than to behold evil, and cannot look on iniquity. Wherefore lookest thou on them that deal treacherously, and holdest thy tongue when the wicked devoureth the man that is more righteous than he? as Habakkuk brings his questions to God, we see actually two things that Habakkuk got right and one thing that Habakkuk got wrong. The first thing that Habakkuk got right was, when you get to question God, you should keep this in mind first. Remember what you know to be true about him. The first thing that Habakkuk did was articulate to God some things in his prayer, in his question, that he knew to be true about God. These truths serve as anchors for us in the stormy life that we're in. And these truths about God that Habakkuk articulates in verses 12 and 13, they really shape his approach, and they should shape our approach to God. First thing is to remember his divine nature. When you come to God, there's some things you know from his word and from your own experience, if you've walked with him any length of time, to be true about him. And the first set of things you know are some things about his divine nature. What do you know about God? Well, some of what Habakkuk articulated in verse number 12 is that, first of all, he is eternal. Art thou not from everlasting, O Lord my God? He is eternal. It's a good thing when you question God to remember that God is eternal, because God's solutions are never in a hurry. God exists outside of time, outside of the limits of time that we live in. God exists above time. God is eternal. He knows the beginning from the end, and he is working an unending thread of purpose-filled redemptive work in this world. It began long before you and I ever arrived on the scene, and it will continue once we're gone off the scene of this earth, and it is an eternal work. And God is eternal, which means sometimes there are loose ends in our lives that he doesn't have to tie up during the bookends of our lives, because he has all of eternity to deal with it. You remember in verses 2 and 3, Habakkuk was complaining about injustice, and he was frustrated that God was overlooking injustice. And what you have to remember about God's justice system is that it is an eternal justice system. Some of the rights to the wrongs that occur won't happen until eternity. And that's hard for us. We watch evil people go unchecked in this world, and we watch righteous people struggle and suffer and never maybe get vindicated. And sometimes it seems like to us it's unfair, and at the end of the story, the rights didn't get wrong. All the loose ends didn't get tied up. Depending on what type of movies you enjoy watching, many movies tie up all the loose ends and settle all the questions and struggles throughout the plot before the movie ends. Everything that was wrong got right, and everything that was going awry got settled. God isn't obligated to work that way in our lives, because our lives are just a little dot on this long eternal thread of the God who is just and who in eternity will punish every single sin, even those that seem to be overlooked during our lifetime. And he will reward every act of righteousness, even acts that didn't seem to have a payoff, maybe during earth. You see, we're so focused on here and now. We want the reward now for doing right, and we want the punishment for doing wrong that someone else deserves to be given now, and we're waiting for it. And yet God is in no hurry, because he's eternal. So remember, first of all, that he's eternal, and remember, secondly, Habakkuk says, "Thou hast ordained them," which reminds us that God is sovereign. God ordains what occurs. And he even could ordain, that is, choose sovereignly, to use an evil, brutal, ruthless pagan army to accomplish his good purposes of chastening his children. Now, does this mean that God is the instigator of evil? No. God is not in favor of evil, but he can use evil. One section of commentary I read this week said it this way: in ways that we cannot understand, God can remain apart from evil and yet use evil nations and people for his purposes, while holding them accountable for their sin. It's hard for us to understand. We see the Pharaoh of Egypt bearing down on the people and the hardening of his heart. And yet God was able to fit that hardened heart of Pharaoh into his plan for his people. We see Judas betraying Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, a terrible, awful, devilish thing to do. And yet we see how God allowed that evil to be used in the purpose of his son going to the cross. God is sovereign. And then Habakkuk identifies the fact that God is holy. Verse 12, my Holy One. What a wonderful way to describe God. You, God, are holy, which means completely separate from sin. In verse 13, I love the way he describes it. You are of purer eyes than can behold evil. You cannot look on iniquity or sin. So we should never be tempted to blame God for evil. James 1:13 says he cannot be tempted with evil and does not tempt any man. God always only does what is right. And because of that, you can always trust him. He's holy. He's right. I think of this phraseology in verse 13. You are of purer eyes than to behold evil. You cannot look on iniquity. And I think that's a little reminder for us of why we, as sinful people, need a Savior. There's no iniquity, there's no sin, there's no evil allowed into God's presence in heaven. Some people think that grace and forgiveness and salvation and the Christian faith is God overlooking sin or excusing sin. Oh no. God doesn't overlook or excuse or laugh at sin or take it lightly. No. Jesus died for those sins. In fact, the only way we can have access to God is through the redemptive cleansing work of Jesus' blood on the cross. The only hope you and I have as sinful people of ever being allowed into heaven is that we get to exchange our sin and place it on Jesus, who took it on the cross, and we get to receive his righteousness, and so that we can go in as sinless because we've been given that sinless standing from Jesus. 2 Corinthians 5 says it this way, he who knew no sin, Jesus, became sin for us, that we might receive the righteousness of God in him. So remember God's nature. He's holy, he's sovereign, he's eternal. And when you bring your questions to God, let those things be settled. He does right. He's in charge. There's another thing you need to remember, though, which is very comforting, and that is this. Remember his heart toward you. When you approach God, you're not approaching someone who's this distant judge on a throne who doesn't know who you are and couldn't care who you are. No. He is a judge. He is enthroned, but he's your Father. If you're a believer in Christ, he has made you his own. He has adopted you to himself. He is close, and he is hands-on. Why do I say we see that in this passage? Because Habakkuk addresses God as my God, the Lord, Jehovah, his personal name, and you are my Holy One. You're not just the holy God, you're my holy God. Then Habakkuk refers to him as Almighty God. The terminology, Almighty God, comes from the same original from which we find other places in Scripture, God being referred to as my rock. David often referred to God as my rock, picturing this stable foundation on which we can rest. David said of the Lord, you're my rock, my fortress, my deliverer. You're my shield, my salvation, my refuge, my Savior. This is who God is for you. And so when you approach God with your questions, don't see it as a situation where he's your opponent. Don't see it as a situation where you have to convince him to come over to your side. No, he's always been on your side. He was on your side before you ever came along, and he sent his son to bring you to himself. So remember his heart toward you. Habakkuk goes on to say in verse 12, we shall not die. That's a great statement because he's saying, I believe that based on the promises I'm familiar with to the people of Israel, that this punishment that's coming, this Babylonian army that's coming, it may be for our correction, but it will not be for our destruction. In other words, we shall not die. He knew that God had for generations promised Israel that they would extend into eternity and that they as a nation would move along on God's timetable uninterrupted. And he knew these things to be true. And he believed these things. And by the way, as a believer, when trouble comes, when chastening comes, remember God's promises to you. He's not going to destroy you. His work of chastening in the life of the believer is never for our destruction. It's only for our correction. Look at the end of verse 12. He says, "Thou hast established them," the Babylonians, "for correction." You're bringing this army against us. Will there be pain? Yes. Will there be suffering? Yes. Is it bringing deserved chastisement? Yes. But will we die as a nation? Will we be annihilated? No. We will be corrected. And I want you to remember God's heart toward you, that when he allows difficulty and when he brings chastening if you've strayed, it's never for your destruction, only for your correction. There's a difference between punishment and correction, right? Punishment just executes judgment, whereas correction brings the object back into a rightness with the one doing the correcting. The Son of Man, Jesus said, did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And Jesus said to you, "I will never leave you, and I will never forsake you." If you cooperate with his tender work, it's going to bring you back nearer to him. It doesn't destroy you. It only corrects you. Being confident of this very thing, that he which hath begun a good work in you will be faithful to perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. God's doing a work in your life. He's not abandoning you. He's not seeking our ruin. He's seeking our restoration. Same with Israel. Same with Judah. Remember what you know to be true about God. So when you come to God with these questions and these things that you're tempted to become frustrated and desperate over, remember some things about the relationship and about who he is. And secondly, I want to show you where Habakkuk got off track. The second thing we need to remember is this: don't assume your logic is flawless or final. This is where Habakkuk erred once he moved into the second half of verse 13 and through the rest of the chapter. And there are two mistakes Habakkuk made. First of all, he made conclusions he shouldn't make. So Habakkuk knew these true, right things about God, that he is sovereign and holy and he is eternal and he will not allow Israel to be annihilated and he will only correct them. He knows these things to be true, and then he begins forming conclusions based on what he knows to be true about God that are an attempt to box God in as to what God can and cannot do or will not do. And this is where he makes a mistake, because we don't tell God what he's allowed to do. And just because we know some things about him, we've studied his word, we've walked with him for a period of time, we have a general sense as to what is right and what is wrong based on the clear black and white spelling of the scriptures in his word, that doesn't mean you're an authority on what God may or may not do. It doesn't mean that Isaiah 55 is any less true. His ways are above our ways and his thoughts are above our thoughts, and sometimes he does stuff that doesn't make sense to us. You learn some things about God? Good. That doesn't mean you have him figured out. It doesn't mean you can tell him what boundaries he must operate within. Look what he says, verse 13. You're of purer eyes than to behold evil, and you cannot look on iniquity. Correct. Wherefore, or why then, would you look on them that deal treacherously? And why would you hold your tongue when the wicked devour the man that is more righteous than him? Habakkuk is saying, well, you can't do this, Lord, because you're holy. Just look at those people. God doesn't need our help in understanding what he is obligated to do. This question about why could God or would God use evil people or evil things for his purposes, that pops up other places in Scripture, and it pops up in your life and mine all the time, doesn't it? I don't know why God would allow that. Anything ever happen in your life, in your world, that you say, I don't know why God would allow that? How can a holy God allow unholy things to advance his holy purposes? Well, Matthew Henry says it this way: though God sees cause to permit it, yet he does not approve of it. Someone else said it this way: God created the Babylonians just like he created everyone and everything else. And so he is always justified to use his creation in any way that accomplishes his purpose without needing to explain himself. And that's why God could use Pharaoh as his purpose unfolded for the people Pharaoh was persecuting. That's why God could use Judas to continue to unfold his purpose for his dear son, whose good purposes God was unfolding. That's why God could use a Roman army and a Jewish religious group to crucify the Lord Jesus Christ, because God can use evil people and evil things within his holy plan, and those evil people are still accountable for the evil that they perpetrate. God had actually already done this before. He had brought the Assyrians 100 years before Habakkuk was written. He had brought the Assyrians in to bring judgment on the northern kingdom, and they were just as brutal and ruthless as the Babylonians. And so he made some conclusions he shouldn't make. Don't tell God what he can and can't do, and don't run around telling everybody else what God can and can't do. Second thing Habakkuk did was he made comparisons he shouldn't make. When you get right down to the crux of it, Habakkuk said in verse number 13, we are more righteous than them, Lord. Now, you might recall that just 10 or 11 verses earlier, Habakkuk was complaining about Judah. He was saying Judah's immoral. Judah has become lawless. Judah has allowed injustice. And then as soon as Habakkuk gets whiff of the idea that the Babylonians are going to come and execute judgment, and God's going to allow this, he says, oh, wait a minute. Judah's not so bad. When he takes his eyes off of Judah and looks at the Babylonians, by contrast, Judah looks like world champions of righteousness. And that's a mistake we make sometimes. Comparison gets us so fixated on the evil in others that we forget that God's primary work in my life is in and through my soul, and in and through my life, in and through my family, in and through my church. And so we don't do ourselves any favors when we focus our attention on those who don't know the Lord and on those who do deserve judgment for sin, because sometimes it causes us to get lifted up in pride. Listen to the way he articulates the evil of the Babylonians. He actually uses a metaphor of the Babylonians being deep sea fishermen who just throw out their nets and drag in their victims like a fisherman drags in fish. Look at verses 14 through 17. These treacherous people, they make men as the fishes of the sea, as the creeping things that have no ruler over them. They take up all of them with the angle or the fishing rod or the hook. They catch them in their net, and they gather them in their drag. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. These Babylonian people, Lord, they don't see people, they don't see human beings created in your image as any more valuable than a fish, or that a fisherman might see a fish dragging into the boat in his net or on his hook. They see human life as cheap. They see men and women, precious souls, as commodities to be caught up and be used for their profit. They have no conscience in killing men. Verse number 16. Therefore, they sacrifice unto their net. They burn incense. That is, they worship their drag, because by them their portion is fat and their meat plenteous. These tools, their nets and their rods and their reels and their hooks, they worship these things because by these things they've obtained wealth. Now, if that's not a description of 21st century America, I don't know what is. These people are worshiping success. They're worshiping wealth. And whatever it is that gets them wealth, that's what they worship. overtime. They worship it. They bow down to it. They never say no to it. They'll push everything else about God aside so that they can, because that'll get them the almighty dollar. Whatever it is. Scheming, manipulation, dishonesty, workaholism, complete neglect of God. They worship these things that bring them profit because that's what it's all about for them, Lord. Shall they therefore, verse 17, empty their net and not spare or not stop continually to slay the nations? They're just going to keep doing this, and they're just going to keep doing this, and Habakkuk is frustrated that God isn't going to intervene. Now, we'll find out next week that God does have a plan for the Babylonians as well. But right now we're focused on this question. We're focused on Habakkuk making a comparison that is not helpful. When we focus our attention on the people who don't know God, who live as if they don't know God, or people that we can find that we're better than them, we immediately put ourselves in a position where we're not in the place we should be to deal with our own sin. No one repents of their own sin while they're fixated and obsessing on other people's sin. And I would caution you, as our world is off the rails, and as immorality is on the rise, and as injustice is all around us, I would encourage you to don't forget, as you're focused on all of that, and as you're bringing awareness to all of that, and as you're frustrated over all of that, don't forget to look at your own heart. Don't forget to look at your own soul. Don't forget to examine yourself. But these sins being committed by these people around us are just terrifying. I know. It should break our hearts. It should spring us into action. Certainly action is right. We should resist evil. We should be salt and light in this world. But let's not be so possessed by fixating on what others are doing wrong that we don't realize we have a mote in our own eye. Maybe I have pride. Maybe I have jealousy. Maybe I have prayerlessness. Maybe I have neglect of spiritual things. Maybe I haven't been a witness. Maybe I have things that I need to do deep work of repentance in my own heart. And I can't do that as long as I'm focused on others. You know, a ship out on the sea, on the ocean, doesn't ascertain its position based on comparing itself to another ship that might be going another direction on the ocean, does it? No. It knows its location based on fixed coordinates that are unchanging. It doesn't use some other relative object to figure out whether it's in the right spot. And believers don't do well to use their neighbor or their other church member or some other person that's on the news as the reason why they aren't so bad. We each should examine ourselves. That's why 2 Corinthians says we should not compare ourselves among ourselves or commend ourselves because of how we compare with others. No, that's foolish. 2 Corinthians 10 says that's not wise. There's a moment where Jesus dealt with this during his ministry. All around Jesus were these religious leaders that their chest was so puffed out in pride. They were so proud of their rule keeping. They were proud of the clothing they wore to the temple. They were proud of the rules they followed. They were proud of the rigorous faith they underwent. And in their heart, they were far from God. So far from God, they would reject and crucify his Son. In their heart, there was pride. There was greed. There was lust and envy. Jesus dealt with this, and I want you to see it in Luke 18 before you go on. Luke 18:9, Jesus spake a parable unto certain of them which trusted in themselves that they were righteous and despised others. Does that describe us sometimes? They trusted in themselves. Your trust is never supposed to be in your own righteousness. No one ever arrives in heaven and says, "Let me show you my resume, Lord. Let me in." No. He's not impressed with that. If you're trusting in your own righteousness, keeping your T's crossed and your I's dotted, walking the straight and narrow, let me help you something, my friend. That won't hold up on the judgment day. But Jesus was talking about people who trusted in their own righteousness, and because they were so impressed with themselves, they despised. That is, they looked down on others. Look what he said. So he told the story. 2 men, Jesus said, went up to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, that's the religious leader, and the other was a publican, that's the looked down upon tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself. Listen to his prayer and see the pride. God, I thank thee that I am not as other men are, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this publican. I fast twice in the week. I give tithes of all that I possess. And the publican, listen to his prayer, standing afar off. He would not so much as lift his eyes up, Jesus says, to heaven, but he smote upon his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Jesus says, I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other one. For everyone who exalts himself shall be abased, and he that humbles himself shall be exalted. We need to learn something from Jesus and from Habakkuk. Our focus doesn't need to be on what everybody else needs to make right. Our focus should be on our responsibility to be thoroughly right from the Lord, because then we can put ourselves in a situation where we can be salt, we can be light, but only as we walk in humility and repentance before the Lord. You see, the Bible doesn't categorize us. God doesn't categorize us as the human race. Here's the good people, here's the bad people. It's not how he categorizes us. The good people keep their nose clean, stay out of jail, walk the straight and narrow. The bad people, they sin a bunch. Well, actually, the way God describes planet Earth and the population of it is this: all have sinned. None of them follow after that which is good and right. They have all fallen short of my righteousness, God says, Romans chapter 3. So the only way any of them can make it into a relationship with God is to be plucked from their sin by the grace and mercy of Jesus, washed and transformed by his blood and grace, and made right with God. Not because they reformed themselves, but because Jesus Christ transformed them from the inside out. And those of us that have experienced that transformation know, we should know, not to get puffed up about our righteousness, because we know any righteousness we have was given to us by Jesus, and we know any standing we have with God is only because of the mercy of Christ and nothing we earned for ourselves. No one is so bad that they are beyond God's redeeming grace, and no one is so good that they don't need God's redeeming grace. Doesn't matter if you're a prophet in Judah named Habakkuk who walks the straight and narrow, or if you're a soldier in the Babylonian army, you need God's redeeming faith. You need to turn to God in repentant faith. And there's no place for this. Well, we're more righteous than them, Lord. There's no place for that. Don't assume your logic is flawless and final. Don't argue with God about what he's supposed to do because you see things so right. No. All of us are in need of his mercy and grace. So when you come to God with questions, first of all, remember what you know to be true about him. And secondly, don't assume your logic is flawless or final. And number 3, wait with patience and humility for his answer. As we come to the end of chapter 1, Habakkuk finishes his question to God. And then he says this in verse number 1 of chapter 2. I will stand upon my watch and set me upon the tower, and I will watch, or I will wait to see what he will say to me. First of all, and this is something Habakkuk did right, he waited for God's answer. He says, I'm going to stand on the watch and set myself in the tower. What is that all about? Well, in Habakkuk's day and age, every city had a wall around it. The wall was built of stone for protection of the city. And then on that wall, in certain locations, atop that wall, were built watch towers, also of stone. And someone was always on duty to climb up into that tower and be on watch for either enemies approaching the city to threaten the city or messengers coming into the city to bring message or news. And so Habakkuk said, figuratively speaking, I'm going to go up into the watchtower and I'm going to wait for God to answer me. Jesus talked about watching and praying. There's an idea here, there's a concept here of being in a position where you can wait and hear from the Lord, where you can wait and see what the Lord has to say to you. You see, in ancient times, the person in the watchtower could see further and could know more than the person not in the watchtower. So while the other people in the city were down at the market doing their shopping or in their home doing their chores or bustling around the streets of the city busily, the one in the watchtower was getting news. The one in the watchtower was discerning what was happening. And there's a contrast here. We live in a busy world, and God's presence and God's answers are reserved for those who will remove themselves from the busyness, remove themselves from the ground level, and come up into His presence and just wait to hear what He has to say. I see here a picture of something that's needed in our modern busy culture. Someone who's willing to just wait quietly and patiently for God's answer. I tend, by my personality type, to be a person of action. I want to roll my sleeves up and start solving problems. I want to jump out of the bed and hit the ground running. And some of you are the same way. And all of us need to learn, though, that the best thing for us to do is to wait patiently for the Lord, especially when there's a problem we can't solve or a question we can't answer or a person we can't change or a world we can't save. I think it was Mueller who said, there's more that we can do after we pray, but we can't do anything until we've prayed. And we need this watchtower. We need this place of prayer. It might not be a tower. It might be a prayer closet. It might be a walk in the woods. It might be a quiet time at a bedside or a dining room table where we seek the Lord. We're not in a hurry. We're not trying to rush God. We are just waiting to see and hear. You know, patience and waiting are a big part of the faith life. We don't like patience. We don't like waiting. I didn't say it was an easy part of the faith life. It's an important part of the faith life. Because God doesn't rush to respond to us. But He rewards those willing to wait. They that wait on the Lord shall receive renewed strength, Isaiah says. David says, I waited patiently for the Lord, and He heard me. Be still and know that I'm God. See, I want to be busy and know that He's God. But David says, be still and you'll know that He's God. A lot of times in our busyness, we don't sense His presence. But if we'll pull aside and wait for Him and pause our frenetic activity, lay aside our tendency to want to manage and manipulate things, and seek Him from a sincere heart, He will hear and He will answer. Elijah needed to hear from the Lord. God told Elijah that He would meet with him, and He told him to go to the mountain. The Bible says in 1 Kings 19:11 that the Lord passed by, and He was going to speak to Elijah. And there was a great and strong wind that broke the mountains, and they break in pieces, and rocks were falling, and the Lord was not in the wind. Oh. And there was a great earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And there was a great fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And then after the fire, there was a still, small voice. A lot of times, God is working in the wind and the earthquake and the fire, but He's speaking often in the place of quiet, patient rest and waiting to tune our hearts to His voice. Is there a concern in your life? A burden, a problem, a question that needs answering, and you're wanting God to hurry up? Well, I just would encourage you, be like Habakkuk. I picture Habakkuk saying, all right, I'm going to go up in the tower and I'm going to fold my arms and I'm going to wait as long as I need to wait for God to answer. It might be that this problem that needs to be solved or this question that needs to be answered is going to require you just to keep doing what you know to be right and keep seeking the Lord and keep watching and praying and wait for the Lord. Anderson said of this passage that the silence that Habakkuk received from God grieved him, but he knew the only thing he could do was keep praying, keep waiting, and keep watching. Sometimes that's all you can do too. The final thing that Habakkuk learned, and a way in which he responded rightly, was as he waited for God's answer, if you read the end of verse number 1 in chapter 2, he expected to be corrected. I love the language that's here in this verse. I will watch or wait to see what he will say to me and what I shall answer, last 4 words, when I am reproved. Habakkuk assumed that when he finally got God's answer, it would involve a reproving of Habakkuk. It would involve Habakkuk discovering that God was right and he was wrong. When you argue with God, when you question God, just go ahead and assume now that if there's something that's frustrating you, there's something that you don't understand why he's doing what he's doing, it's probably you that needs to be corrected, not God that needs correcting. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. We're going to discover it's not God that needs us to tell him what he should do. It's God that will tell us what we need to understand a little better. And we'll understand it better, the song says, by and by. There will come a day when we'll look over our shoulder and what God did in and through our lives and around us made sense. It will all be beautiful in his time, Ecclesiastes says. It will all unfold in such a way that in hindsight, on the other side, when we're in heaven, we will understand that everything God did along the way was good and was for our good, even with all the evil that was mixed into it that was a result of this world's sin. God is doing a redeeming work. God is doing a redemptive work, and he wants to invite us into it. We can't be involved in that if we're arguing with him, if we're fighting against him, if we're too busy comparing ourselves with other people. The way to enter in is by waiting for his answer, seeking his presence, and bringing those things to the Lord and expecting him to do a work. Let's pray together. Father, we thank you for your grace to us and your faithfulness to us. As we bow our heads in prayer, I want to encourage you, church family, and those watching online. Would you just do what Habakkuk did right now? Would you just bring your prayer to the Lord? Wait for his answer? Would you just commit the burdens, the problems, the frustrations to the Lord, casting all your care upon him because he cares for you? Different ones of us probably represent different burdens, different questions, different concerns in this room. What if we gave those to the Lord right now? Come boldly to the throne of grace, that you may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need.